Namaste. As a part of our series on psychoanalysis and spirituality, today we shall discuss the meaning of the word enlightenment. Enlightenment is a word that inspires and also gets many people interested in it globally. It is also an object of ridicule for some and a goal for many people. To discuss this today, we have with us our psychoanalysis consultant, Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
Can we begin with what does enlightenment mean?
Everyone would agree that we have many faults in us. Everyone would also agree that if we work upon ourselves to create the best version of ourselves, the best version of ourselves would be at least 5 times better than what we are by default.
Right.
This goal, in secular language, you call it the goal of self-development. In the spiritual area, this goal is shifted slightly higher, and we call the goal state of spirituality as the state of enlightenment. What we mean by this word is very different. On the secular side, we have terms like self-actualization of Maslow, individuation of Carl Jung, self-development of the development psychologists, realizing one's potential of the human potential movement. On the secular side, we have these goal states. And in psychoanalysis, we have the goal state of being able to accept reality and to be able to work and love. So these are the goal states on the secular side. On the spiritual side, the goal state for the individual is the state of enlightenment. Now, this is where the diversity comes in. Because in spirituality, like in psychology, we don't have one single school, but we have many schools. And therefore, the goal state is defined separately by each school. What is common in all definitions is this. The state of enlightenment involves 1. High self-awareness, 2. Ability to go into a state of no thought, 3. Experiencing bliss which does not have any reason in the outside world. It is a causeless bliss. These three are the common things in all definitions of enlightenment. This also means that the person has overcome the negative aspects of oneself. He has been able to reasonably control the unconscious or purify the unconscious. He has been able to reasonably be clear about life. He has been able to reasonably work through his desires and fears. And his intuition is very clear. These are the secondary deductions that we make by looking at enlightened people. Now, another aspect of enlightenment is when we look at the diversity, apart from these commonalities, what are the differences that give different meanings to this word? If you look at many Buddhist schools, many Tibetan schools, and Osho Rajneesh, some schools of Zen, they would say the ability to go into a state of no thought on demand is enlightenment. Because unless you have reasonably worked through your desires and fears, you cannot go into a state of no thought and be there. Desires and fears will propel thoughts outside of your control. So this is one definition. If you look into some of the Jain schools, what they will do is they will say even this is an intermediate state and you will have to drop the element of bliss, the element of being having high amount of positive affect, and you just get into pure awareness of Kevalya. So the only thing that remains is pure awareness. That is one definition of enlightenment, which is slightly different from the definition that Osho Rajneesh would give. Then there are some other Buddhist schools who say that you also have to go further and drop even this self-awareness and get into a state of nothingness, which they call as nirvana. So that creates a third definition. Then you have the Vedantic definition, which says that the state of no thought or of pure awareness or of no awareness, they still are not the final stage. The real stage is to feel oneness with everything. So many people have experienced this in the Indian traditions, and Yoganand Paramhans defines it very well. He says, in that experience, you find center everywhere, circumference nowhere. There is no difference between I and not I. I is continuous with everything across. So this is another Vedantic definition of enlightenment. And then you have Sri Aurobindo's definition, where the state of no thought is followed by the experience of the psychic in the center of the heart, followed by oneness with everything, the third experience. And the fourth experience is to go out consciously above the range of higher mind and bring down those things into everyday working, to the extent that not only the thinking mind and the emotions, but even the body undergoes a transformation. So for them, the state of no thought or the state of awareness or the state of oneness is only a preparation for the last step. So we have this entire menu of enlightenment. So many definitions of what enlightenment means. And we have not really studied in a scientific way, where we would consolidate all of them and then try to study and find out whether it is sequential, that X is an intermediate step to Y, or it may just be diversity, that different people may have different paths and there is no clear-cut hierarchy between the paths. And there is no sequence that this experience has to be followed by that experience. Any experience may be the last experience for any person's evolution. So these are the questions that we really need to debate upon, and that can be done if we study spirituality in a more scientific way. Spiritual
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
Just your last sentence, that trying to study spirituality in a scientific way, how feasible or possible it is, and do you see it happening in future?
Yes. I think unfortunately we have not taken even the first steps. What is more likely is there are two elements to it. First is consolidation, and second is empirical study of all that we consolidate. So the first is the consolidation of all that we have from tradition and from people who are alive and who have experienced these things. So that creates the raw material on which we have to apply our thought and use all our tools. A good beginning was made in the Menninger Foundation experiments, where Swami Rama subjected his yogic states to empirical investigation, where his heartbeat, his brain encephalograms, whatever they call the brain grams, all of those were studied. And unfortunately, we did not have many people who opt for this kind of examination, people who have experienced rare states. So what has happened is that in parapsychology, people have opted for studies. But strictly in the spiritual sense of enlightenment, those who have got enlightened, very few of them have opened themselves up for study. And therefore, I think it is possible to study it, and it can happen in two ways. Step one is to put together everything and logically think about it. And step two is empirical investigation, where our limitation is that we would need somebody who has experienced these states to volunteer himself for empirical investigation.
Right.
So it is difficult because we cannot find respondents as easily. This is the 1 in a million case. So it is not that everybody can be a sample of study in this. These are rare people who have these rare experiences. So it is difficult, but not completely undoable. And the small beginning is 2 steps before it. Not people who have got experience of enlightenment, but people who have got experiences which we would call as parapsychology experiences, like out of body experiences, uh, abilities to see something which is kilometers away. Obviously, you cannot do it using the physical senses. Experiences of psychokinesis, experiences of future cognition. So this set of people have what we would call as occult powers, just 2 steps short of spirituality, we would call it mysticism. So people in that area have opted for investigations. In area of spirituality, we have few subjects. So it is difficult, but I think it is the next step to do, where 3-4 things can be done. First, consolidate. 2, empirically investigate. 3, create tools or test out tools to accelerate journey of people towards enlightenment, those who are interested. And that is more easy to study. And create new innovative tools in order to accelerate that process. So when we talk of enlightenment, we talk essentially of 3 points. 1, what does the word mean? What are the various meanings? And is there a hierarchy to it, or it is just a diversity of states, where each state may be a last state for many people, or even if an intermediate state, but these states not necessarily are in a hierarchy. That is one. The meaning of the term and the relationship between various meanings of the term. The second aspect is from where we are, how to get there. The path to enlightenment. So the first is the meaning of enlightenment. Second is the path to enlightenment. And the third is, once somebody becomes enlightened, how is his life? So even those 1 in a million cases, when we see them living in the everyday world, what is the difference between them living and us living? So that gives us a taste of what kind of world we would have if a significant people would become enlightened. And that gives us another window into, can this be a solution to many problems of the world? So today we are dealing with the meaning of the term, and in subsequent episodes we'll be doing the other 2 parts. We'll discuss other 2 parts of the paths to enlightenment and the life after enlightenment. So this is how we can look at the word in terms of its various meanings that come from tradition, And some people ridicule it also, including a few people who are enlightened themselves, who refute and ridicule the idea, even as their own states of living prove the idea.
Uh, is enlightenment omnipotence? Most people tend to confuse these two terms.
Yes, it is not omnipotent at all. Enlightened person is not omnipotent. Enlightenment does not bring omnipotence. The enlightened person has same limitations as most of us would have, only the degree is different. In traditions also, most traditions don't claim omnipotence, although some do. In some traditions, it is claimed that once you become enlightened, you know everything of past, present, and future. But these are minority of schools. Majority of schools don't claim such omnipotence. Most schools, what they claim is that this is the end of one's personal soul evolution. And therefore, the person is not mandated to take birth again. They also, most schools also believe, and I think it is true because I have met a few people of this type, and it is true that there is enhancement in terms of clarity of thought, peace of mind, ability to use intuition, uh, heightening of positive emotions, virtual absence of negative emotions. I would not say complete absence, but a significant absence of negative emotions. Ability to sort of get into a conversation with existence, the whole, in a mystical way. And freedom from compulsive thinking, fear, and ordinary desires. These are enhancements which make an enlightened person different from an ordinary person, but by no means he is omnipotent. It also comes out because the counter argument would be that if the enlightened person is omnipotent, why doesn't he permanently change the world for the better? Because if he is not changing the world for the better, there are only two reasons possible. Either he does not have capability or he does not have compassion. On compassion, people don't doubt that they don't have compassion. So people believe they do have compassion. The only difficulty is of capability. That regardless of how enlightened you are, or whether you are enlightened or not, let me not say how, whether you are enlightened or not, there are limitations. This question was put to Osho when he was arrested in the USA. It turned out that his room was bugged. And somebody asked him, if you are enlightened, why couldn't you make out that your room was bugged? And Osho said, enlightenment only means that I know myself. It does not mean that I know that my room is bugged. So definitely they are not omnipotent. All of them fall sick, all of them die. And nobody is able to really change the world forever. They make their own small contributions. But despite so many enlightened people having come and gone, the suffering in the world still continues. And that was because it was beyond their capability to really make a permanent change into this world in that sense of annihilating suffering. So even Buddha could show you the path towards ending suffering. He could not end suffering. He could not even make people successful on the path, even those who wanted to go. So there are obvious limitations to enlightened people, and it may be that it is enhancement of what we are, a radical enhancement, but still an enhancement. It is not as though a person transports himself into a new superspecies.
Next related question to the question of omnipotence is, does an enlightened person get supernatural powers?
Uh, in most cases, yes, but the supernatural powers are not so radical that one would cancel the law of gravity or electromagnetism. So, yes, in most cases, I would say almost 80% of cases, there are some supernatural powers with the person, but most of those supernatural powers are by and large, uh, I would say, soft powers. They are not the type of powers which could fundamentally alter the nature of things. So it is not the power to create a new sun or moon, or to alter the orbit of the earth, or to reverse the direction of time, or to alter the fundamental laws of nature. Not those kind of powers. So we have to be clear about what kind of powers we are referring to. So yes, there are powers of clear intuition. There are powers of clairvoyance. There are powers of out of body experiences. There are higher powers of thinking clearly using intuition. There are powers of healing people. There are powers of guiding people. There are powers of helping people with their karmic load. But the powers are not so radical that one could alter the fundamental nature of this world, or the laws of the universe, or even to convert one's body into an immortal body, or to be 100% immune from all forms of sicknesses. So very few people would claim that kind of a power. At least I have not met anybody who claims that kind of power. We do hear account of some people with such kind of powers, but it seems that just as in the normal population we have one enlightened person in million, it's one in a million case. So I think within the enlightened population, you again have a one in a million case with person with that kind of a power. So there are powers, there are enhancement of powers, but nothing so radical except in few schools. In the South Indian school of the Siddhas and in some traditions of the North, we do hear accounts of people with very radical supernatural powers. Not that somebody is cancelling the law of gravity, not that kind of stuff, but we do hear powers of controlling some forces of nature, say wind or rain, or falling of a stone, or raising somebody from the dead for some time. That kind of stuff, at least in accounts we hear. I have never seen that happen, but at least we hear in terms of claims. But even those are rare things, even in terms of claims. Even more difficult to verify whether it is mythology built around some person or whether it's an actual claim. So to answer the question, yes, there is enhancement of powers, supernatural powers, what we would call supernatural by a normal standard, but the enhancement usually is of a measured extent. It is not radical. It also depends upon which path the person has taken to enlightenment. People who have gone by and large on the path of Jnana Yoga or integral yoga, we don't find them with such radical powers. But people who have gone through the path of Tantra, where on the path, accumulation of power also is a part of that path. People with who have traveled that path, when they become enlightened, I have seen people with such background, they have far more supernatural powers and they use it also. The powers are stable also compared to others, because I have seen, I can contrast two people I have met. One person who went through the classical intellectual path towards it, and the second person who went through the Tantra path. Of course, he was not the left hand person, a right hand person of Tantra, but the person with Tantra background had far more supernatural powers than the other person who had gone by and large to the path of knowledge. So, one aspect also is which path the person has chosen.
What are the limitations of an enlightened person?
I can see many of them. One is all those that we know about, if we read their lives and if we read all that they have written or said, we do find imperfection in their lives also, and imperfection in what they have written also. So there obviously are limitations in everyday living. There are limitations of knowledge. There are limitations obviously of capability. They could not change the world forever. There are limitations on the medical front. They all fall sick and they all die. And many things happen in their lives which they don't want to happen. And this refers to many of those enlightened people who have family members. Many things happen with their family members which they don't like, but they can't do anything about it. So there is no 100% freedom from suffering. Even if one gets enlightened, one can get into a state where you are unaffected by it, but there is no way you can prevent that from happening. What is unpleasant? You can go into a state of no thought and you can become an observer and you can keep observing it and you can see the karmic principle behind it. You can see the unreality of things and you can understand that. But there is no way you can prevent something from happening all the time which is unpleasant. So the limitations are obvious, and this is where I think unfortunately people are not ready to accept it, because people are in search of an omnipotent person. It is the childhood search for an omnipotent parent. And because people are in search of an omnipotent guru or an omnipotent enlightened person, they project that omnipotence and they are not ready to accept the limitations of an enlightened person. Because many of them, in the name of enlightenment, are actually in search of omnipotence.
Sir, are there people who really question this whole idea of enlightenment?
Yes, there are many. Uh, Rationalists, communists, left of center, they laugh at this idea. They don't even believe such an idea is possible. Psychoanalysis looks at this idea in a classical way by looking at it as regression to early states of childhood. It also looks at them as at this whole idea as the search for the all good breast. And there are few people like UG Krishnamurti who themselves underwent this experience, who after having been enlightened question the very idea of enlightenment. So we have criticisms coming in all colors and flavors, and my feeling is that as we start neurologically exploring more and more of psychology. And fortunately, we are today at a point where it is starting off in a very strong way. Coming together of psychology and neurology is happening in a much stronger way today than before. So my feeling is that sooner or later we will see the distinctness and the pricelessness of this state, and that alone will settle the controversy which is going on, because it is such an experiential thing and it involves such rare experiences which are not everybody's everyday experiences, that it turns ultimately the debate into a debate of belief. The only way out is an empirical proof, and people are now investigating it. There is a book which is called Two Saints by Arun Shori. It talks about Raman Maharshi and I think it is Ramakrishna Paramans. I think it is these two saints. He talks about two saints. I may not be correct about the name of the two people, but he talks about two saints, and he brings about lot of neurological knowledge to try to explain the states they were in or they have been through. So my feeling is that that empirical knowledge alone will settle the debate. Till then it will continue to be a matter of faith.
Are human beings naturally programmed to evolve towards enlightenment? Can we say that?
We don't have a scientific answer to it. It is a belief answer that I am giving. But personally, I believe it is true that we are programmed towards it. And there is a new area of study which talks about it. Very interesting name of that area. It's called neurotheology, and it talks about how neurologically we are programmed for spirituality, and therefore when we take to spirituality we feel so peaceful, we feel we have arrived, we feel a different sense of satisfaction, a roundedness, the feet touching the ground, as though something very important missing is now in place. So they explore these aspects, and they also explore certain latent areas of the brain which are believed to get active in the spiritual process. And therefore, those latent areas are not vestigial organs, they are unactivated organs. So, there is this area of neurotheology and many other scientific areas which are going towards the same thing. In psychological terms, also we can come to the same thing. For example, there are many studies which tell us that people with a strong spiritual belief or active spiritual part in their lives, on an average are more happy, more contented. So you can easily do these studies of 100 people who have a spiritually active life, 100 people who don't believe in spirituality, have comparable income levels, age levels, and so on, and find out the levels of happiness, contentment, satisfaction, and so on. And in general, studies have told us that quality of life is generally better for those with spiritual orientation and belief than those without it. One interpretation of that, and not the only interpretation, but one interpretation possible is this, that maybe we are hardwired for it. And my personal belief is that yes, we are hardwired for it. It is just that this is not something that occurs to us by default. In the process of self-development, which may occur over many births, a time comes when we start realizing this. and that is where uh, the hardware sort of reveals itself.
We come to our last question. How do you see this concept developing in the coming times?
I see it happening in the following phases. Phase 1, conceptual consolidation of all that has been said in this area. All the definitions of enlightenment, relationships between them, is there a hierarchy? Is it just a diversity? Second is, in terms of what Jung calls individuation or program of life, how do you build in the spiritual component into it on a more well-studied scientific basis? Third is, what are the various paths and what are the various tools that one can use about it? For example, if somebody is on the path, how do you accelerate the path? And you can have tools from psychoanalysis, CBT, holistic healing, pranic healing, Reiki, all of them to accelerate. For example, if one has to empty the buckets of negative affect, one has to empty anger, fear, pain, guilt, shame, envy. Now, this would be true as much for psychotherapy as much for spirituality. And therefore, any tool which helps you to empty those buckets is a welcome tool. So, first, just as we consolidate the concepts and the meanings of the word, second, we consolidate the tools and empirically study those tools so that we can use a particular set of tools for a particular person. And third is, how do we innovate in a more radical way? For example, can we have something like a crystal house in pranic healing, where one can just go and sit and the crystal absorbs much of the negative effect? Can we have certain chemical concoctions which are mentioned in Ayurveda and many shamanic rituals or shamanic knowledge, traditional knowledge, where certain things, if they are ingested, they help in certain psychological processes? We have this entire area of mantra visualization, idol worship, and this whole process of rituals, which also help one to overcome the negative effect. So the same negative or blocked effect can be overcome by acupressure, by acupuncture, by homeopathy, by shamanic practices, by psychodrama, by tai chi, by yoga. So the same negative effect block is overcome by so many methods. We need that consolidation and empirical study so that we have a very clear menu of the meaning of the word and a very clear menu of the tools and paths towards enlightenment. That is an area which I feel requires, the first part is easy, consolidation. The empirical testing part is a laborious thing which has to take some time. But my interest is on the third part, radical innovation for accelerating the process to enlightenment.
Today we have discussed this very interesting subject, enlightenment, in its general meaning. In our coming videos, we'll be going deeper into the subject. Meanwhile, for any feedback or queries, you can write to us at hvindia@gmail.com. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.